Alright, good day everyone. So today we are going to look into more about our carnivorous plants and specifically about lighting and light acclimation. I guess that's why you're here. It's because you want to know more about how I chose my lights and how I chose how far they are from the plants, how long do the lights turn on, and how close, I mean, how do I know if my plants are getting enough light. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and discuss that. So here we are at our art studio. So this is basically my trays for my mother plants and some of the new cuttings that I have. And on the other side, we have a couple of bog gardens that we're doing. So yeah, some of them are flowering already. Anyway, so now let's go ahead and discuss about lighting. So just a forewarning. So this is going to be a technical discussion. So do get ready for a lot of scientific gibberish. But anyway, so what comprises of a grow light? So a grow light is basically a bunch of colors emitting down into the plants that we have. That's what we call light. Anyway, so how do you choose the correct type of light that suits your grow area or your indoor garden? So how I did that decision is based on the color spectrum of the lights that you're seeing. So every time you're buying lights, especially grow lights, they will usually show you a graph of the color temperature that the light has. So that graph has to be between 400 nanometers or somewhere on the red area and 700 nanometers or somewhere in the, oh sorry, I think I mixed that up. So 400 nanometers somewhere in the blue area and 700 nanometers or somewhere in the red area. So why blue and red? So blue is basically used by plants for vegetative growth or to grow leaves or to grow the plant altogether. The red color is what the plants use to produce flowers. So although I mean predominantly that's what the plants use, but you need both to have optimal growth and to have reproductive growth on your plants. So what about the green area? So the green area is, or the green color on the spectrum is what we see. Okay, so it's the light that is visible to the naked eye. So that's why it's not really a correct way to measure the lights that the plants need using the term lumens or lux, because if you measure the light in terms of lumens, that's actually the intensity of light on the naked eye. So it's not on the plant's perspective, it's on the human perspective. So if you measure, if it has a higher lumens value, then your light is going to be brighter on your perspective, but not necessarily for the plants. So for you, it might be too bright already, but for the plants, it might be too dim. So you have to look at the color temperature of the lights. So it has to have more red and blue than green. Okay, so but so does that mean that I can't buy any lights from, let's say, the hardware store and use it for my plants? Not necessarily. So there are actually some lights that are available on your local hardware store that you could use. So one example of this is your regular CFL light. So the regular CFL light, although it has a lot of green in it, it still retains a lot of the blue and the red, which the plants can use. The only problem with CFL lights is that, number one, it costs more because, I mean, and it's smaller compared to like this long bulb. I mean, imagine this is a 22 watt LED light, and this one I'm holding is roughly 24 watts already, and that's gonna cover a smaller portion of the grow area compared to this one. So, but if this is the only thing that they have, what I did before is I placed like 3 of this in my grow area, and they grew up really well. So you could use CFL lights. You could also use LED lights, but for LEDs, you should check the color spectrum that I've mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's how you choose your grow lights. But if you're buying grow lights like this one from Delponting, they usually have the data or the par data with them, and a concise color spectrum. So from there, you could already determine if the lights work well for your setup or not. So that's how you choose your lights. You could also use metal halides, but just like CFLs, metal halides are very expensive, plus they produce a lot of heat. So that's one thing that you have to consider when you're choosing lights. So you want the lights that doesn't generate too much heat, plus it generates a lot of intensities that your plants need. Okay, so now that we know what lights we're using, so how do I determine how far it is from the light? So actually, there is a scientific term for it, which is called par. No, so again, it's not lumens, it's not watts, it's par. Okay, it's supposed to be par. So par stands for photosynthetic active radiation. So that is the amount of light that the plants need in order to perform photosynthesis and in order to produce food for the plant. So now, scientifically speaking, you need 250 to 300 par in order for your plants to perform photosynthesis. But the problem is, here in the Philippines, even in the States, par meters are very expensive. So, very expensive, and most of the time, they're not available. So, I had a hard time looking for a par meter in Amazon when I was looking for one. But anyway, so long story short, it was too expensive. It costs around $400 to $700, even more than $1,000, and basically, it's not worth it. So anyway, so that's how you measure it. So that's the correct way of measuring it. But in the absence of a par meter, what can we use to determine if your plants are getting enough light? So one way to determine, especially for carnivorous plants, if your plants are getting enough light, is the presence of dew. So for sun dews, you will see that a lot of your plants will be producing a healthy amount of dew. So as you can see, my Drosera expelesiana, they're producing dew. So are the Drosera ordensis falconeri that I have there. Also, you will see some plants turn more red. So that's actually true for pitcher plants and Venus flytraps. So as you can see, the traps on the pitchers on my pitcher plants are starting to turn red. So are the traps from my Venus flytrap. But reddening of the leaves in carnivorous plants normally mean that they're getting too much of that light. So in this case, these pitcher plants are getting too much light, while this Venus flytrap is getting right around the correct amount of light, but it could use more light, as you can see, because for B52s, you'd expect that the traps could be redder. Okay, so that way you would know which plants should go higher and which plants should go lower. So that from there you could determine if you would want to raise up your light fixture or to move them down. So it depends on the plants that you have here. Also, another indication that your plants are getting the right amount of light is if they start flowering. So as you can see, a lot of my sundews, this capensis right here, is starting to produce flowers. So from there, you would determine that your plants are getting enough light or even too much for some of them. So just like this one, for your live sphagnum moss, too much light also means that the tips start to burn. So so from there you can make the decision if you want to raise the lights or if you want to place them lower so that your plants will get more red. Also, you could place your plants on a platform so that it would be closer to the light. So how do you know how much light is usable? So just like when you go outside, usually when you go into a room or when you go outside, you see some part that's pretty much lighted, and then once you go closer, you can see here there's more light when you're near the bulb. I mean, when you go directly under the bulb, and there's less light when you move your hand further from the bulb. So so that gives you an idea that if you put your plants closer to the bulb, closer, or I mean more directly perpendicular to the bulb, then your plants are going to receive more light compared to when your plants are moved further from the bulb. Then this plant will receive less light than what this plant is receiving. So that gives you an idea on how much light your plants are getting. So again, a good indication that your plants are getting enough light is if they produce dew. Also the media, if you're using live sphagnum moss, then if the tips are turning red, then that, I mean turning black, then that means that your sphagnum moss is getting too much of that light. So that means that light is usable. Okay, so that's kind of like a hack that I use since I don't have a par meter. Okay, so now we've discussed how to choose the right kind of light and how far your plants should be to receive the right amount of light, and how to determine if your plants are actually receiving the right amount of light. So now what we need to discuss is how long do you keep your lights on. And this actually varies from plant to plant. So if your plant needs more light, so and you could only have so much, or if you could only put it so far, then you tend to expose your plants longer. So that's another way for them to receive the amount of radiation that they need in order to perform photosynthesis. So in my case, since my plants doesn't receive any sunlight at all, so I expose them to 14 hours of light. In some growers, for some growers, they actually expose their plants less, and part of the reason for that is that their plants actually receive some sunlight throughout the day. So it's kind of a mixture of outdoor and indoor. But for my setup, for my primarily indoor setup, I expose my plants to 14 hours of light. Again, so if say your plants are closer to the light, then you could actually expose them to less light. So instead of 14 hours, you could probably expose them to 12 hours of light. But if your plants are probably further from the light, if say they're further than the ones that I have, you could actually expose them to more. So some growers expose them to 16 hours of light, some 14 hours of light, just like what I do. For aquaponics guys that are, I saw them from that are growing basil, they actually turn the lights on 24/7. So it really depends on the plants that they're trying to grow, how far they are from the lights, and how much light those plants really want. So the rule of thumb there is right around somewhere from as low as 6 hours to as long as 16 hours of light. So that's how you determine how long your lights are on. Okay? So now, what do you do? So how do you acclimate your plants? So this is actually one of the more common reasons why newly acquired plants tend to die on their owners. It's because they're not properly acclimated, especially on the light that they're receiving. So how do you acclimate them? So whenever I get a new plant, even if it was under, even if it was under direct sunlight when I got it, even if it was too close to the light when I got it, the rule of thumb is whenever you subject a plant to stress, such as repotting, or if they are moved from one area to another, say if I move this to another room, or if I ship this to another person, then whoever received the plant has to light acclimate them. So so again, if you repot the plant, if you just receive the plant, or if you move them from one area to another different environment, also if you take cuttings or pullings from the plant, then you have to light acclimate them. It's because you've subjected them to stress. Okay, so that's basically my rule of thumb. Other growers, they probably don't do the same thing, but in my case, that's how I do it with my plants. Okay, so how do you do light acclimation? Light acclimation is basically, so let's say I just got this plant. So what I'm gonna do is, I have a predetermined area on where plants will receive the least amount of light. So for example, in this area, the one that's furthest from the light, which is this one, this is usually the area that receives the least amount of light. So that's where they will start. Okay, so that's where the plants will start, and then slowly and gradually I move them closer and closer and closer to the light. And if I see that they could still use more light, then that's when I start to move them up and up and up and up towards the light. So that's how I perform light acclimation. So again, from the end of my grow area, so again, before you do this, you have to predetermine which area of your grow area receives the least amount of light. It could be further. If I would be more strict, I would probably put them here, but I guess this one is far enough. So that's where they start, so furthest from the light. And then after I see new growth, meaning I've seen traps that are healthy and they're not withering, that's the time that I move them closer, and then I'll wait for the plants to produce more leaves, more traps. And then once I see more healthier traps, then I move them closer until they're directly under the light. Once they've done that and I can still see that they could use more light, then I move them closer to the light vertically. So that's how I perform light acclimation. So the same goes with the Drosera. So when I have a new Drosera that came in, so this, for example, this Drosera Ordensis falconeri. So the same process happened. So when I got this, there's probably less dew on the plant. Dew meaning those sparkling liquid that comes from the plants. So to begin with, what I'll do is I'll place them at the end of the setup, and then I'll wait for new leaves to form. And if I see those new leaves are forming well, then I place them closer and closer and closer until I put them in a place where they are most suitable to. Okay? So that's basically how I acclimate them. So what about repotting? So the same way. So if I repot the plant, or if I put some cuttings just like these ones are actually adjusting. So this used to be one big plant, and I'm waiting for them to actually so they started here. So when they started, they were here, and you could see some visible signs of stress on the plant. Some of the older traps are dying, and then there's new traps that are forming on these ones. So what I did was, I waited for them to produce new traps, and then little by little I moved them closer. So now they're kind of where I want them to be. So they're kind of there already, since they've been producing new traps, or new new traps. So that's how I do light acclimation. So this one also just woke up from hibernation. So again, since this one is still adjusting, so I placed it furthest from the light, as you can see. So once it starts producing dew, so as you can see, some of the traps are already producing dew, then I can actually move it closer to the light. And one of its brothers or clones, one of its co-hibernee for the lack of a correct term. So this plant also underwent hibernation, and after it woke up, so I did the same thing, and now it's closer to the light because it's already starting to produce dew. So that's basically how you take care of your plants. Another instance where you have to light acclimate them, at least in my opinion. So just like these ones are actually flowering. So I'm just waiting for them to finish those flowering stage, and once I've cut those flowers off, I will also move them back here and reacclimate them to the light. So that's basically how I perform light acclimation. Okay? So another way to perform light acclimation, if you don't have the luxury of space, let's say your grow area is only this far to the wall, so technically your plants are receiving the same amount of light, right? So how do you perform light acclimation? So another way of doing that is by exposing your plants to less time under the lights, or to less photo period. So say you could start by exposing your plants to 6 hours of 6 hour photo period, or exposing them to 6 hours of grow light, and then after 6 hours you could take them off the grow area so that they will be exposed to less light. And then once it shows you more traps, just like how we determined the acclimation earlier, if it's starting to show more traps, if it's starting to show healthier traps, and then you can expose them to longer photo period. So instead of 6 hours, you could now increase it to 8 hours, and then you can increase it to 10 hours until they can be subjected to the optimal amount of light that the rest of your plants are getting. This method is kind of more tedious compared to the other method because it entails more monitoring on your end, but at least it will still ensure that you will do the same acclimation to your plants as to how we've done it earlier. So this ensures that your plants are gonna grow better. Okay, so that's two ways. So again, recap. So one way is to you move the plants further from the light, and then another way is to move them away from the grow area after a certain amount of time. Okay, and another way that you could actually do is you could actually put a cover on the plant, something like a plastic cover, and then put a thin piece of paper over the plant so that it doesn't receive that much light. But I feel like you could risk damaging the plant that way. So instead of doing that, the method that works for me is actually moving the plants further or removing the plant entirely from the grow area. Okay, so that's how you perform light acclimation. So yeah, so that's basically it. And yeah, before I forget, there are actually some more instances where you could use your light acclimation techniques, and one of that is when you produce cuttings or pullings. So here I have some Venus flytraps that are currently growing. So these are small ones. Not sure if you can focus because the light's too bright. But yeah, so these are some small Venus flytraps. And basically I did the acclimation the same way. So from the pulling, so since there's no leaf, as you can see, this one is the one that's furthest from the light. And as soon as it produces more traps, my plan is to move them closer or to put them in a higher pot so that it receives more light that way. So yeah, so I hope, so that's it for our video for today. So I hope you've learned a lot about lighting and about light acclimation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to drop a comment down below. You could also send us a message on the Hobbyist. You could also follow us on Facebook. And yeah, so that's it for me, folks. Thank you guys for watching. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. Please give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, that's it for me. And I will see you guys soon. Peace.